You're listening to ayahuascapodcast.com.
It connects with that part of us that is connected to everything else. It shows us, how we can become aware of that, be more in a more knowing state and in a more loving state, so that all those things we want to happen outside of ourselves are related to that. And once we see that and agree to start changing that intentionally, it's no different than the integrative process. I think that that's what ayahuasca does. It just has a different language. So people have visions they don't always understand, and things happen emotionally and bodily. And, it may seem alarming from the outside or even from the inside. But ultimately, I think that this is the purpose. Even dark experiences, which I've had.
Hi guys, and welcome to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, with the host Sam Believ. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with Rebecca Hayden. Rebecca is a hypnosis practitioner specializing in personal growth, self-discovery, and healing. She's the host of the Ayahuasca Talks podcast, where she and her guests share experiences and insights related to ayahuasca and other plant medicines. Through her podcast and writings, Hayden explores the therapeutic benefits of ayahuasca, focusing on its role in healing emotional wounds and fostering personal transformation. She emphasizes the importance of self-love and authenticity. In this episode, we talk about hypnosis, overcoming depression, supplements for tapering off antidepressants. We talk about integration, importance of group dynamics in healing, the way ayahuasca healing works, ayahuasca zealot phase, and more. This episode is sponsored by Lawira Ayahuasca Retreat. At Lawira, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. Lawira, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you to work with ayahuasca?
Just before I entered the world of alternative healing entirely, I was working on documentaries, and I did a lot of research for a particular documentary that I never ended up making. It just got so dark and depressing, and that was a tendency for me in my life anyway. So it just got kind of worse. I mean, there were some good things that came out of it. Things started to make sense to me, the way that I viewed the world and why. So that was helpful, but all the rest of it was kind of really hard for me to take. And my purpose in going into that work was to help the world. And I think that in the end, even though, I thought I was doing a good job of that, I realized that, not only was it not really helping, it was harming me. And my son was really young at the time. And, one day I realized I just had to walk away and heal. And so then I started with energy healing, and then I wanted to understand. I was in research mode, because I was a researcher and documentary filmmaker. So when these magical things started happening with energy healing, I thought, what is this? Where does it come from? Who started this? And so I went into the whole history of that, and I discovered shamanism as a result, which was the root of energy healing. So then I pursued that, and then came plant medicines. And my first medicine was Iboga, actually, in 2014. That's after I started to work with shamanism and journeying, and all kinds of magical things were starting to happen already. And then Iboga was a big experience. And then I was ready for ayahuasca.
Interesting. You mentioned documentary this year. That's actually the next retreat, which starts next Monday. We're gonna start filming a sizzle reel or a trailer for a documentary about ayahuasca. So it's very timely. So I think we can talk about it later. But I've heard that when you were dealing with extreme depression, and that you just asked the universe for help. Can you talk to us about that story?
Yeah, that was so odd. I mean, not so odd now because I've had much more odd experiences than that. But at the time, this was completely outside of anything I had experienced. I was researching, you know, another topic entirely, like having to do with deep politics and nothing to do with anything beyond, what's seemingly called the rational world. And there was a discussion on one of the websites that I was delving into about attacks of some kind and um, surreal stuff that actually delved into the political end of ETs and things like this. So they're already getting into this, content that was beyond, anything that I had delved into before. But with it came a lot of familiar stuff from the political world, those people who don't want others to discover certain things. So anyway, there was this whole discussion about someone reaching out into the universe, and I thought, and at that time I was really suffering, and there was no help that I hadn't already gone for, in the conventional world of medicine that didn't work out at all. So one night I was looking at my son, and I reached out into the universe and just said, hey, I need help. And really shortly after that, I discovered a documentary that helped me get off my meds because at the time I was on depression medication. And I didn't want to be. It wasn't working, hadn't been for years, but getting off of it was difficult. And a lot of people will attest to that. And even tapering didn't work. So, and this documentary was not about that necessarily. It did talk about some supplements for depression. But by the end of watching it, I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I put together a protocol for myself. And I actually did it literally overnight. And I don't recommend that to anybody because it it was a pretty miraculous thing. I had no side effects. This is, unheard of, really. And again, I do not recommend people do that. Go to a naturopath. So ultimately, down the road, I did go to a naturopath for another matter. And she asked me, I told her this story. She asked me what was my protocol for getting off of the depression medication. And when I gave her the list and how much I was taking, she said, that's exactly what I would have recommended for somebody. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, when you start delving into this world, synchronicity start happening and things start falling in place. I know, I know you don't recommend it, but and not as a medical advice, but what are the supplements that are good for depressed people?
It was so long ago. People always ask me that when I tell this story, and I don't even remember what I was taking. I think it was like a lot of niacin, which is a B vitamin, I think B3. Um, and omegas, like a lot of omegas and other things I can't even remember. D3, I think. There were a lot of them and at high dosages too. So I would really, do your own research and find a naturopath that can help with this too. Because I know this is a big issue with ayahuasca as well. I talk to people and I let them know they have to get off of them before they go to a retreat. And it's a big matter. Like it's not easy. It was very, very difficult for me.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 when people who need ayahuasca the most, they tend to be on antidepressants, and obviously it does not combine well with the ayahuasca. So before they can even come, they go through, a gruesome period of weaning off, and everything becomes even more difficult. Obviously, ayahuasca helps them afterwards, but that period, it's a very big roadblock for many people.
It is, yeah. But things coming up pre-ceremony is not an unusual thing either, right? So, but you're right. It feels like a rite of passage thing where you have to prove that you're, ready. And yeah, it's challenging, but I think it can be done. I do. I mean, I know I did it myself, but I think it can be done in a more reasonable manner too. So that's something that is worth looking into to get a naturopath on board and get a protocol. I can even dig mine up, I think, maybe, or some reasonable facsimile thereof for you to pursue if you want to help people who are thinking of coming to the retreat center.
Yeah, getting off antidepressants is like a test by the universe. It's like how badly do you really want that healing. And so you use supplements, your depression got better. Um, and how much from then till you actually working with ayahuasca?
That was before I started energy healing, and my depression didn't get better right away. It was just a feeling of empowerment that I could actually get off this medicine by myself, and I just started to feel like, yeah, there's more going on here, like, um, I asked for this help, and suddenly I'm starting to get this stuff without, knowing where that was coming from. So that was a good beginning, but no, it was a long, long road. Then I just discovered this energy healing guy, very mysterious stuff. Like there was this long ad in a natural magazine that I had subscribed to, and like no website that I was aware of at the time or anything like that. And I contacted him, and he just sent these like energy waves to me, and my body started moving in all these ways that were not dictated by the brain. It's not like I'm going to lift my arm up now. It's like my arm would lift up and move in these strange ways. And I'd go, wow, that's interesting. I was the observer. And I walked away from that going, how's that possible? Like, what's going on there? And that's when I took that deep dive into energy healing. And then I started pursuing shamanism, started journeying. And then things just started to happen spontaneously. Like I'd get downloads, and at night, lots of messages, and had to start to work with my dreams. And then, so one night I asked about Iboga. I discovered Iboga because I was pursuing this shamanism thing, going, what's this all about? And people started talking about medicines because I wasn't working with medicines at the time. And then I heard it was really good for depression. So I thought, okay. And then one night I asked, is this for me? Because I had already started to establish this back and forth. And I knew I was receiving guidance. So just before I fell asleep that night, I got this big, powerful vision. And my eyes were closed, but I wasn't quite asleep yet. I was in a theta state now, I realized, because now that I do hypnosis, I realize what that state is. And that's what we do when we go into hypnosis. So I was in a journeying state, and I got these like this explosion of color and psychedelia, like psychedelic kind of art moving though in motion. It was like a little movie. And to me, that was a big yes. Yeah, this medicine's for you. And my question was two-part. Is Iboga for me, and when will I do it? Because this was like the dead of winter. And I saw grass. Like then my vision zeroed in on brand new, bright green grass. And I did not like that answer at all because it was like, I don't know, January, and I was really suffering. And I decided to misinterpret it as, yeah, there's lots of grass where you'll be going, because we go to warm countries to do these medicines. So I went and researched and found a place, and everything kept falling apart every time I tried to plan this trip, like spectacularly fall apart, to the point where they wouldn't even talk to me after, because every time I said, yeah, it's happening, and then it wouldn't. And then I found this other place suddenly that was like far more appealing to me, and just, how your body just says yes. And so I went, okay, maybe I should pursue this. And when that happened, the weather suddenly turned and got warmer, and literally overnight, the snow melted. There was green grass visible the next day. The money came through, and everything fell into place, and I went and did Iboga. So, and ayahuasca didn't show up for me until like the next year. So that was 2014. And then I went pursuing it, and I found Iboga, or no, I found peyote instead. So I had that journey. And then in January of the next year of 2015, everything came together. And like this place was booked up months in advance, but they said, apply anyway. And sometimes things happen, and something happened. And I was like there within a month, and yeah, it was an amazing experience.
Interesting. But obviously, your podcast is called Ayahuasca Talks, not Iboga Talks or Peyote Talk. Um, uh, what was so special about ayahuasca that you dedicated your time to creating the podcast and interviewing people about it?
Because once because ayahuasca is my medicine, and I discovered this because I was having all of these experiences, but once I agreed to do ayahuasca, it was apparent she was working with me in advance. And then when I was in the medicine, there was just tons of dialogue, whether I was in the medicine or not, and a strong indication you'll be working with us. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And I got a little sort of scared. And I said, look, I'm new at this, like I didn't know what it meant. And this voice said, don't worry, we'll stay with you. So um, after I went home to Toronto, um, this voice just stayed with me. There's a story behind that too. Like when I went to do peyote, there was in ceremony, there's a tradition where you offer a gift. So you're supposed to give a gift. And I had in mind immediately, as soon as the facilitator said, you have to give a gift, I knew exactly what it was. This little jade pendulum that I never felt comfortable with. It's supposed to give you a yes and a no. It's supposed to be a communicator spiritually, right? But it wasn't for me, and I knew it. I loved it, but I didn't use it for that purpose. And I thought I had it in my backpack with me on that trip. So he said, you have to give a gift. Immediately this came to mind, and I trusted that. And I went and searched. I almost tore this backpack apart looking for it. It wasn't there. And I said, I know what I have to give. And he said, okay, it doesn't matter. Go to the town, pick something nice, something like peyote jewelry. All the artisans, ritual people make them. And I said, that's beautiful. That's exactly what I'll do. So I picked this neck or this bracelet, and it was exactly as he described it. And anyway, we went up the mountain to do this ceremony. And by the time I got there, again, it was not there, and these tricks were happening, these strange things. And it's because I knew what I needed to offer. And I knew that I needed to put that jade stone in the ground. So anyway, the facilitator said, I'll offer this on your behalf. And I thought, fine, you go ahead, but I know what I have to do. Anyway, when I got back home, it was winter and there's no way I could put anything in that ground. But in the spring, when everything came through for ayahuasca, and they said, don't worry, we'll stay with you during this, this dialogue in my journey. I came home, and by that time it was spring, and I put that jade stone in the ground, and boom, all day dialogue. So ayahuasca was talking lots every day.
Sorry, I didn't understand. What happened after you put the jade into the ground?
Then the dialogue kicked in, like, all day long. Yeah. So I was having the kind of dialogue that you do in medicine journeys in my everyday life, and it was just ongoing.
Story. We have lots of people that come to the retreat, and then they want to get rid of some jewelry, throw it in the river, rings and stuff like that. That seems to be a pattern. And when did you start working with hypnosis? Was it before or after?
It was after, because I was really compelled to tell my story, and I did, and I shared a lot of the things that I was being taught, because this was a big part of that experience was, okay, we're teaching you all this stuff and we want you to share this stuff with others. So I started doing that. I mean, I started a website and a blog, and started speaking engagements that really terrified me at the time too. So it was that was a whole part of my integration, I guess, too. And then people would ask me, "Well, you have all this guidance, isn't that great? How can I do that? How can I get that going on?" Right? And I thought, "Wow, good question," because it's not like we all know what's going to happen with ayahuasca. We don't. Like, I couldn't have predicted this was going to happen to me. And it wasn't easy either, like, um, during depression, I was very isolated because that happens sometimes to people who are depressed. They don't want to go out. They don't want to engage with the world. And then when I had all this dialogue going on all the time, I had to do the same thing because I had to kind of get a handle on it and try to learn to live a life when this was going on. And I had tons of questions. So there's just this communing going on like all day and all night. So anyway, when people asked me about how can I connect in that way, I thought maybe this is what I need to do, is to find a way to help people to do that, in a way that's less intense, perhaps. But just like with the medicine, we have to trust that it unfolds for everybody the way it's meant to. Anyway, there was this guy that I came across who was doing these shows, and I'm not a big fan of that whole version of hypnosis, but at the time I was just so open and so curious, and I really wanted to understand the application of hypnosis as it pertained to helping people re-experience um, anything, especially his thing was, hey, you can re-experience a drug experience without, having to do the drug. And of course, this was not something I was, a big fan of. But I thought, if you can do that, why can't you re-experience ayahuasca or something else in a state that's not as, that's more manageable, that you can do on a regular basis, and reconnect and help with integration, help us live the lives that we need to live when we come back from this magical experience, right? So ultimately, that's what I did. We had a few nights that we put together where we helped people re-experience their ayahuasca journeys. So that was interesting. And I do help people do that too when they come away going, I'm not really sure what the message there was, or I want to go back to explore something else, and so I can help people do that now. And the guidance thing too. So in those states, we can make those kinds of connections. And that's why I got into hypnosis, because ultimately that's what I wanted to help people do, and do a lot of other things that happen in the medicine and yeah, that sort of thing. So it's a pretty amazing tool.
It sounds very cool and also very scary. Um, what are the similarities or main differences between the ayahuasca trance states and the hypnosis states?
The difference is that, first of all, when people go into hypnosis, most people don't even realize they're under. You know what I mean? They're they know what's going on. And the trick is to not. The trick is to focus more deeply within and not pay attention to the external stuff, right? But they do know, and people feel safer that way. And so they start to realize that they have control over this to some degree, and that when they allow themselves to let go, it's an intentional thing, and it's something that they can navigate intentionally. So that's a difference. There's a lot of similarities, but the intensity isn't there as much, so people will get, you know more than visions. It's a full-on journey. So animals will show up. Um, when I intentionally go in and help them make spiritual connection, they'll get the dialogue and the guidance and the weirdness sometimes. This figure showed up and here's what it looked like and what does that mean? And I try to help people just focus on the things that have to do with helping them in their lives. It's like, this is what we want. We want you to focus on things that are going to help you live a better life and have a better experience here. Things that are pertinent to you and important for you. And all the magic is great. And I think it has a place. And we don't always know exactly what all of it means. And I don't know if there is meaning for all of it. And sometimes there is. And if that feels important to a person, we can delve into it. But I try to get them to focus on things that are going to help them in their lives. And there's not a lot of difference. It's just less intense, really.
we had one lady, and she's a hypnotherapist, and she works with groups, and she knows a lot about the topic. And she came to the retreat. One thing I can say, I'm not going to mention her name, but she was. I've never seen anyone drink that much ayahuasca in a way that she would not be able to walk, and she would ask us to help carry her to the altar so she could take another cup. So her body gave in, but her mind was still active. And after that, we had to come up with the rule that unless you can walk up and take a cup, you cannot take another cup. She was
Very interesting. I think that, you know, a lot of people pursue things because they want to deal with their own issues. We all do, really, you know. I know I did, but with hypnosis, it was more like a tool to keep going what I was already doing, all the journeying and the energy healing and all of those things. But it surprises me, but everybody's got their own journey. Maybe that's something that she needed to experience for herself, to learn something about herself. I know I keep learning about myself, and that's ongoing, and it's a good thing.
so I know you focus a lot on the integration side of things, and after you had your ayahuasca experiences, your other plant medicine experiences, how was your own integration journey? Um, and what lessons have you picked up there to share with our audience?
God, there were so many. Um, there were just so many, and they're ongoing. Becoming just more aware of myself was number one, and of course, self-love. It has to be there. But everybody's journey to self-love is unique to who they are, what they've been through, where they're at in life, all of those things. There I was with a young son, and this just constant dialogue and these energies that were coming up in me, these harsh, edgy things that I knew I had to release. And I was being guided through all this, which was helpful, but it was really challenging. So I was in situations where, it's daily life, and I'm, putting breakfast on the table for my son, and this edgy stuff is like really, coming down hard on me. And I know he can feel it. And I'm like, don't worry, honey, it's going to go, and these later, and I couldn't make sense of it at the time necessarily, but later, and now I realize that these are our energies we picked up for, over long periods of time through family, through even other lives. And we have to be open to intentionally releasing them if we don't want them to play a role in how we're experiencing things here now in our daily lives. And these are strange concepts to get used to. And I delved deeply into some of it, and other stuff I was cautioned not to go into. Let's just heal and focus on your everyday life, the things that you want to change, and everything that we feel we can't have or we would like to have. There's always something inside of us that's working against us that we have to change. And so it's been a constant, sort of road of doing those things. So my relationship with everybody around me had to change. I had to stop playing the roles that I was playing with those people. So, I think most people have had experiences with family members or friends where things weren't as even or as healthy as they could be. And often in our society and many others, the focus is on the other person. Oh, that person's fill in the blank. But with my integration path, it was all about, what role am I playing? How am I participating in that? So with this particular person for a long period of time, this message kept coming in every time I interacted or even thought about this person. The message was, don't participate, don't participate, don't participate, over and over and over and over again, until I had to face, like, okay, what am I doing? Like, what's that participation? And I did get a sense of it because this message was so strong, and I had to just step back and go, so what was I about to do, when that message came through? And then I started to just learn a lot about myself. My whole integration was about learning about myself, and journeying is a great way to do that, because We're no longer just thinking. We go into experiential stuff and we get nuanced feelings about these things. And with my integration path, because of this connection, I was doing all that all day long. Like I was having these feelings, something would be going down and just an everyday experience. And yet my feeling about it was really intense and deep. And I knew, okay, this may seem pass off as acceptable in my life before, but now I know it's really not good stuff and I've got to do something about it. I would still have to do the work like everybody else. So, what's going on? What was my part in it? How can I change that part? Where'd that come from? Let's go there and find out and heal it.
So it seems that in your case, you get a very clear guidance, as in like don't interact with this person, don't engage. But for someone, let's say somebody just had their first ever ayahuasca experience and they're having trouble going back to their normal life, like what would be the practical steps for them to integrate? Like anything specific you would recommend to do, or
Well, I mean, it really depends on the situation. I mean, everybody's so unique. And the reason I love working with hypnotic journeying is because somewhere inside of that person, they do know what they need to do. You know, Sometimes people are in utterly abusive situations that they have to leave, but there has to be steps even there. And or they're in a dangerous situation, they have to get out. I don't know. This is like hypothetical, and with each person, there's different circumstances. There might be a child involved, but this don't participate wasn't, you know, don't interact with this person. It was don't participate in the way that I was. So I had a friend who was in an abusive situation, and it was verbal abuse, which is not to be taken lightly. But I counseled her in the same way, like, don't participate in the way that you do. Don't respond to those things, don't involve yourself in his rants of whatever they are. And she was able to leave him because she was no longer playing a role in that abuse. She was no longer receiving it and responding. And of course, that made him, get very frustrated. And things had to come to a head so that she could leave, so that she could see very clearly instead of participating in it. And that's an extreme version. Like, there's all kinds of all subtle, experiences that we have socially with other people when we come back, and some of us feel it more intensely. And then it's just time to start to look within and start to realize what's our part in what's happening if we don't like it, and stop focusing on all these other people and focus on our own role in what's going on and start to change that, discover where that's from. It's just the go-to thing, no matter what was happening, even when I was really getting a lot of dialogue, no matter where I wanted to go in my mind to, say I couldn't do something because that's going on, but that's happening. These are very real things. It would just continually bring back to me, continually. And I thought, I have to surrender to this or I'm going to go out of my mind. And so finally I did. And then I just learned a lot, and people can learn a lot when they create the intention to do so, and that has to be a very definite decision. I'm going to not blame everybody else anymore. No matter how badly they may be behaving, I'm going to understand, what my role is because I can change myself and just keep going in that direction. Even our intention to do that is extremely powerful. And once we work with medicines, I believe they do continue to work with us when we reach out to them in our minds and say, yeah, I'm ready. Let's do this, show me, tell me, let's go.
thank you for that answer. At your podcast, you interview a lot of people about their ayahuasca experiences and their integration journey. Have you been able to figure out, or what is your opinion on how the ayahuasca healing works? How does it happen? Is there any patterns that you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, right? Because it's so different for everybody. It really is. I mean, I'm sure you have experienced this where people come in they feel like, okay, nothing happened for me, because they didn't get the big, visions and all the rest of it. And then they go home and sometimes, surprisingly, things do change. Or sometimes they have to discover they're very closed down or who knows what. But I think it's just really different for everyone. And the only explanation that I can give about how that medicine works with people without going into the science end, which is not my forte, is it connects with that part of us that is connected to everything else and shows us, how we can become aware of that, be more in a more knowing state and in a more loving state so that all those things we want to happen outside of ourselves are related to that. And once we see that and agree to start changing that intentionally, it's no different than the integrative process. I think that that's what ayahuasca does. It just has a different language. So people have visions that they don't always understand, and things happen emotionally and bodily. And, it may seem alarming from the outside or even from the inside. But ultimately, I think that this is the purpose. Even dark experiences, which I've had, and I still have at times in and out of the medicines. In the end, if I relent and I say, okay, I'm not going to play the role of victim here, it doesn't mean you don't always get help. You can. But if you agree to be curious and say, what's going on here? Like with the medicine, we have to agree to go into the experience and knowing that we don't know what it's going to be like. It could be really challenging, but we have to agree to do it. So I think there is an agreement with the medicine. Some people don't always make it successfully. That if we agree to surrender to it, to work with it, and to discover these things about ourselves, that's what this medicine can do. And so much more that we have no words to describe. There are some people who are very unique and they're meant to discover all kinds of things that, seem very strange to other people. And integration can also play a role there where you come back and you feel like an alien in a strange world. And then it's about navigating that, and it can be done. I don't know if I answered your question. It's a big one. I'm still trying to answer that question myself, right?
It is a question that I ask often to people that work with ayahuasca a lot because I would like to be able to explain it better to people as well when they ask me. And the experience that you described, that for someone that arguably have not connected, but then their life has changed significantly. I actually have a podcast episode with one of the guests that came to Lawara, and he left after 4 ceremonies feeling that nothing happened to him, just to come home and realize that everyone else noticed that he changed, and then his depression went away. So he reached out to me asking me to send him a logo of Lawara because he wanted to tattoo it. That's how significant it was for him. But at the time he was here, he was completely convinced that nothing happened. So
This is the same with hypnosis too, with hypnotic journeying. And I worked with someone once who described this whole scenario that he wanted to happen in his life, but had a hard time really letting go in going into those states. And then later, we're friends and we were chatting, and he started to talk about all these opportunities that were coming his way and changes he made in his life, and didn't relate them at all to all of those things that we were, intentionally working on through journeying. But some people, they can't wrap their head around it. It doesn't mean it doesn't work, that it can't work for them and with them, which is magical in itself.
something very similar along those lines is when after the ceremony we have a word circle and people are sharing, and somebody says, well, I didn't have any experience, and then they go ahead and share for 5 minutes a very perfect ayahuasca experience. It's just that it was not the experience they have been expecting based on the video they've seen on the internet, or what the highlight reel their friend told them about their ayahuasca experiences. And that's kind of part of the guidance, just constantly working with those expectations. Like We just had a new group arrive yesterday, and today I was talking to them exactly about that and telling them, do not let your intention become your expectation, because that's not how ayahuasca works. Um, in your podcast, have what are the more sort of incredible stories, or what are your favorite stories of healing that you recall? Anything that comes to mind?
Hmm, that's a difficult one. That's a really difficult one. The stories that I gravitated towards were the ones where people had on the spot lessons because I related to that, because those were the experiences that I was having and I was trying to, and you know what it's like when you have this crazy experience and someone else says, "Oh, me too." And you go, "Wow, that's great." But the reason I liked it too is because when we learn things through medicine and it's so beautiful and deep, and there's this deep, wonderful knowing in that moment of the truth of the matter, and then we go back to these lives, it can be very difficult to bring ourselves back to that place of understanding how this is playing out in our lives, especially with really close family. And there was one story with a woman with children. I thought I can relate to this so much because that's the most challenging relationship. And and she was describing this in the moment feeling like, oh, wait a minute, I got to stop right here and right now and not go into that mode that I usually go into. And she was having just this download as the behavior was just about to happen, and she stopped it cold and responded differently. And to me, that's the kind of magic that I'd like to see happen in this world more. And I do think that we can bring it about. So there's a client that I had that started working with me and then, had the spiritual connection in the journey. And then we invited those things. So we do that intentionally in these journeys sometimes. If people are open to it, to say, will you invite, this kind of guidance, like on the spot? Yes. So this client was in a particular professional experience where a situation where normally, you know, he would have made one decision, but at that moment, instantly, it was like, no, you know what? I'm going to go in this direction. And it was far more bold, far more, fulfilling, and worked out beautifully. And those are the stories that I like the most um, because we could really use that in this world. It's otherwise it's all theoretical. There are certainly other stories about how people come back into their lives and realize, wow, I've been focusing on all the wrong things. I need to, be a more loving person because that feels better, not because everybody will think better of me or, out of guilt or shame or any of those things, just because I know this is the way to be. And that's a truth that will never leave me, kind of thing. And that's a theme that you'll hear through many, many stories, right? People know, they know, the obvious thing that is the elephant in the room. Suddenly they come back to their life and realize how important it is and how fundamental it is to every human being, right?
Yeah, it's ayahuasca is shadow medicine, so a lot of times it reveals to us what is hidden from us, and then it becomes immediately obvious. It's very interesting. But you mentioned those immediate lessons, and it is interesting that with ayahuasca, sometimes for me personally, I set an intention for a ceremony and I get a totally different answer. And then the answer for this specific intention comes to me in a ceremony 2 years later. It's almost as if ayahuasca and its perception of time is not as linear as ours. But there are cases where the lessons are immediate. Like in my case, a few months ago, I had a ceremony, and ayahuasca taught me about patience, and it was very timely because I was being really impatient and really kind of forcing things, and it was very valuable. And of course, in this case, it's like that's what people expect from ayahuasca. I come with the problem, and it just gives me all the answers, and I can then go ahead and never have this problem again. But even then, the lesson that came through and I connected to it so powerfully faded away, and it's kind of hard to connect to that state on demand. And I guess this is where integration comes through. But when you're running a retreat and you're so busy, you almost, interestingly enough, have to sacrifice your own integration in order for other people to have good experiences. So
Well, not necessarily, I mean, everything is part of it too. Um, I learn a lot about myself through working with clients too, and it never stops. But so what I would recommend is you to find out what's the root of that impatience, and discover that and go there deeply and heal that intentionally. Because, there's a lot of the reason why we call it a medicine is because the behavior that we've become so accustomed to is a sickness. And when we regard it as a sickness, it's not a bad thing because then we first of all, there's no judgment around it. We don't judge someone for getting a cold. Um, and we have more compassion. And this is the way that we can be with others. This is the way that we can be with ourselves. So early on, when I had like all of this dialogue and a lot of it starting to focus on me and my behavior, and I realized how judgmental I was about myself, And in fact, there was a tremendous fear in some ways of going to certain places because of the fact that I knew then I would have to judge myself. If I admitted this about myself, then I have to go through all the, self flagellation that would inevitably follow. And so I think there was even a learning process with this presence that was teaching me that I wasn't ready for certain things then. The introduction was important. And then the process of, okay, what are the fears that are getting in the way of this person learning about themselves? Let's heal that first, And I think that's sometimes what we perceive as the timing issue. It has to do with where we're at and what we're not ready for just yet, and giving us what we are ready for and really need in the moment in at that time, And we can't dictate that.
yeah, you don't choose the lessons, as we say. Ayahuasca gives you what you need and not what you want. You mentioned learning from others. I think that's a really important part of the healing with ayahuasca because if I could put a number on it, I would say here at the retreat, half of the healing comes from the medicine and the other half comes from the group and sharing and mutual support and mirroring each other. What do you think about that, about group setting versus sort of individual work with the medicine?
Yeah, group dynamics are interesting because I think this is going on in our everyday life for sure. But when it's in a group and when there's medicine involved, and whether you're in that journey with the medicine or in between days, it's still working. It's magic. And things play out, you know, in and amongst the people who are there to heal together. Even that intention is a really powerful thing. People come together to heal. And sometimes I'm sure you've experienced this where people will be triggered and even arguments and all kinds of strange things and strong emotions coming up. And people are provoking these things within one another so that they rise to the surface so that we can become aware of it and heal or not. People, we all have free will and people can decide, you know, no, I'm not ready to do that just yet. And that's fine too, and to be respected. But it gives us that opportunity. And in groups, that can be very profound. There can also be tremendous challenges with people coming in that have a lot of, dark stuff going on. But I do believe, and this is coming from a person who's been, psychically attacked in ceremony, that, you know, all this, there's something going on there. It's not random. There's a reason we end up in these situations that we do. And finding that out, that's the empowering part of it. Okay, so why did I invite that experience, into my life? What led to that? How can I change that and invite new, better experiences? What is that teaching me? What is it helping me with? these are the things you can also question when you go into any kind of journey or even create that intention in your life.
Yeah, people provoking each other or sort of triggering each other. And what I like to say is like the healing is not always pretty. It's not always going to be this beautiful experience. A lot of healing will come from the frustration that arises, or if you repressed an emotion, you need to feel it first for it to finally leave you. So, and a lot of time the group does that together, but there seems to be an understanding that healing is happening and there's no hard feelings afterwards. Um,
Oh, I have a story around that too. It just came to me, if you're okay with me sharing it. So, in ceremony, I'm sure you've been through all kinds of experiences, and I'm going to describe one that was very interesting. And it describes group dynamics too, and group dynamics can play out in milder ways. But in the medicine, this one guy was obviously taken over by something, and it we had a really gifted shaman that was totally aware of what was going on. Let that person go through their experience, you know and he wasn't really harming people at all, but he was going back and forth between this demonic presence that was, to me, it sounded funny, actually. It didn't sound threatening or anything, but you knew it was, like, dark. And then there was this baby voice, that he was going through at times too. And the whole time he's deep in his medicine and experiencing whatever it is he's experiencing. And any time the shaman felt he was, in any way, like, he would, do his thing. The shaman would, like, send a message over, and he was very, very talented. I felt so safe, and I knew he knew what he was doing. So other people can get distracted when that happens, right? They're trying to go into their own journey, and this noise is going on. And so the guidance that I received was, let's use this, let's have fun with it. So I was releasing a lot of things, and I was doing so with the sounds this guy was making. And I was using those sounds to release this stuff from me. And it became like this video game, and there was a vivid sort of imagery associated with it. But it was also agreement on my part to not freak out and to say, okay, how can I use this? Let's go with this. And it became fun and funny, and it was fine. And other people were just having this, like, oh my God, I'm trying to heal here and da da da. And, you know, that is their own journey too. If they allowed themselves to go in, they would probably find out, things about themselves that made their experience more difficult as well. And it doesn't mean this guy wasn't doing the things he was and that it couldn't be potentially annoying. It's just, so what do we do about that? This is what this voice constantly says all the time. What are you going to do about that? And gets me out of this wham 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 mode and into, okay, let's take action. And if I can't, then let's explore why, and let's do something with it, something useful and helpful. Anyway, I felt that was a very interesting experience. The next day, the guy who went through all this stuff was talking about how much he learned, and the judgments he had about people with dark behavior and how he didn't have them anymore. And it was very interesting stuff.
yeah, it's sort of like being a victim or adopting a creator mentality and just being like, what can I do with this situation, or what can I learn from it? It's very valuable. Um, so Rebecca, you work with documentaries before, and I want to ask you for advice. This year we're gonna be filming a documentary about ayahuasca. What do you think world needs to know about it? If, let's say, if there was to be a documentary on Netflix about ayahuasca specifically, what should it include?
Well, to be honest, I think what we need to learn about is us, not the medicine, what the impact the medicine has on us. I think that sometimes we can fall into the same trap that has happened with religions all over the world, where it becomes all about the God and not about who we are as people and what we're doing here. And the same can be true of medicines. And I can see why that happens. It's a pretty miraculous thing. And you are in awe, and this happens a lot. But I think when it comes right down to it, the medicines really do want us to just become better people and have better lives, and that's the message that's gonna truly impact people. That's really gonna help them. When we talk about others and what they're doing or not doing, or even the miraculousness of the medicine is a very inspiring thing, but how it can change people is far more inspiring, you know? The real stories of people's lives. There's a reason the Bible used stories. It's a very powerful tool because we can relate to it, we can understand. And when we start seeing how people, you know, came into this situation one way and walked away with a very different set of ideas about what they wanted out of life and how they were going to achieve that and what they wanted for themselves and who they wanted to be, that that's the most profound story. Another thing is, especially when we work with cameras, people are at their most vulnerable. And what they agree to when they're going into an experience and right afterwards, then when they're in this really elevated state, and then a month, a year down the road, it's a whole different story. And I mean, it may be true of people who are not in those states, but even more so. So be very careful about that and know that um, even though what we're trying to do, what I think we would all want to do for those of us who've ever wanted to convey the magic of this medicine to other people is to take an experience that happens inside of you and and share that with another person. And it can't be done. The only way it can be done is through words and images that fall, terribly short of what the truth of this experience can be. But we are that truth. And when we see people change so dramatically, you know, we have this discussion a lot on the podcast, or we have in the past, where people come out of these experiences with what my friend termed like evangelistic fervor. Everybody's got to do this medicine, and I understand it. I really do, but I don't think that's the way to go about it. They settle down eventually, and they realize, wow, okay, I don't know if that's true, first of all, because it's not for everybody. It's wonderful, and I hope and I know a lot of people will pursue it. But, you know, it the rules that apply, the way that we've been going about things has to change, you know? So in this, the same thing is true. People don't change because you come out and say, everybody's got to do this. People want to do the medicine because they see someone changed and they know and experience the truth of that. And then they know within themselves they need to change. That's what makes people want to do medicine, not people raving about it. People actually change and them experiencing. Yeah, yeah, and it's understandable, it really is. Like, I totally get it, but.
So lead by example. Don't force people. Once they see how you change your life, then they will change as well. This is very valuable feedback. So make a documentary more about people and less about the ayahuasca. Rebecca, so we're coming closer to the end of the show. Any parting words? Any recommendations to people? And most importantly, where can they find more about you?
Well, my website is RebeccaHayden.com, and my podcast is ayahuascatalks.love. And yeah, you can find out more about working with me there. You can reach me at reach .rebecca@me.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not as active on any other social media, really. But once you go on my website, you can find me easily. And yeah, just when it comes to ayahuasca, it's like a relationship. And I think the best way we can approach it, any relationship, is with openness, trust, and love. And the same thing is true of our experience in the universe itself, that we're having this relationship with the outer world. And I think the same rules apply pretty much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for sharing your story and your knowledge with us. Guys, you've been listening to Ayahuasca Podcast. and I will see you in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support us and psychedelic renaissance at large, please follow us and leave us a like wherever it is you're listening. Share this episode with someone who will benefit from this information. Nothing in this podcast is intended as medical advice, and it is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This episode is sponsored by Lawira Ayahuasca Retreat. At Lawira, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. Lawira, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you.
Con la vida, vida de la baila, cura con la guaira, limpia, limpia, taita, vibrando.